Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. And this is the channel where you will learn about education and all of these subjects that touch on education, which is pretty much everything at this point. If you are not already a member of the channel, I would ask you to please consider subscribing. That way you'll be notified when I make new content. And please consider liking and sharing this broadcast so other people can take advantage of the information presented as well. I would also invite you to join my locals community at thereasonwelearn.locals.com, where you can dive deeper into these issues as well as learn about homeschooling and leaving the system if that is what you would like to do. And I have a Substack where you will be able to listen to the audio podcast of this broadcast. So today I am privileged to have with me someone I met quite some years ago on LinkedIn, actually, due to shared interests. This is Alaric Naudé. And he is joining me from South Korea. He's a professor of linguistics at Suwon Science College in the Republic of Korea, an expert scholar, researcher, and free thinker in the fields of education, linguistics, social science, and business. He has most recently been serving as the head professor of the English department there. And I've asked him to join us because he is the author of a fascinating book I can recommend to you called The Babylon Cipher. This book is about why everything is language and language is everything. And I've titled the broadcast after one of his chapters, Chapter 8, Language Engineering and Propaganda. Reason being, I see a lot of things going on today in the use of language in and around education, especially because that's what I cover, but everywhere. You'll hear some things about COVID policy and just life in general. And I wanted him to come and explain to us how this works, how language engineering works. First of all, what it is, how it works, and hopefully why it works, so we can better understand what's happening to us when we communicate with others. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, I've been promising to come on for a while, but finally, because of the time difference, we are
right. It
finally here. Yeah.
It is challenging, but we have made it work, and I am greatly appreciative. So we were talking before we began recording about the parts of this problem. And as I just mentioned, there's the engineering piece, which I'm not sure people even know exists, that there is such a thing as language engineering, that it can be done passively and overtly. And then certainly how it works and why it works. So could you maybe start off by explaining to us what you mean by language engineering? What is that?
Okay, so language engineering is basically, in plain English, brainwashing. So it's brainwashing through propaganda, giving out a message that a particular group wants society to believe and to take in. That's basically it. Yes. So it's using some kind of message to change people's thinking, and through their thinking change their behavior, which is the final end.
Interesting. Do the group use this to become the group? In other words, to become people in a position where they're able to do this? Or do they
Yes.
just find themselves there? Oh, okay.
Well, there's really two groups within any kind of propaganda movement. There's the group that know what they're doing and they're doing it on purpose. They're the ones that are engineering it. And then there's the group that don't really realize it. And especially in the beginning, that group is really important for getting momentum to whatever the message is. So without a kind of catalyst group of people that follow the ideology, it's not really possible for that to grow to any real size where it can affect society. But the point is, you actually don't need a very large amount of people to start changing what the whole society believes. The percentage can be quite small. It will start working at just 1 or 2% of the population. The idea will start going out, which is very, very low. And once it reaches about 4% of the population, the general idea of the population will start to begin to shift. It's also very low.
And I would imagine with the means of communication we have at our disposal now, technology, that happens with frightening speed.
Right. It's not really comparable to the past. I mean, we're saturated in communication. I suppose the average person today probably takes in 1 year probably about 20 lifetimes of information compared to a person who lived in the 1910, 1920. So we're inundated by information, television, radio, internet, books, magazines, everything,
Wow.
billboards. You're surrounded by 24/7
Hmm.
propaganda of some variety.
Wow. All right. And when you say propaganda, how do you differentiate between regular language use or evolution and the specific and engineering and then propaganda?
Uh, these days, the line between normal communication and propaganda have become so blurred that it's sometimes hard to differentiate between the two different things.
Mm.
For example, advertising. Basically, all advertising in the corporate world relies on the same principles that are used in propaganda. So they're giving you a message, they're telling you, buy this, why should you buy it? And of course, they're only giving one side of the story because they want to make money off you.
Right. That makes sense.
So, yes. So the
Now,
same principle in business is actually the same principle that's used by ideological groups.
what is that? What so in other words, I'm trying to sell you something.
Right.
The
I'm trying
ideological
to
groups are
sell you.
trying to.
I'm trying to convince you of something. I'm trying to tell you why this is good and why you should buy it. Or I'm trying to tell you why this is good and why you should believe it. The
Wow.
outcome is basically the same.
Fascinating. Now, in your book, what surprised me, because I had never thought of it before, is you talk about different types of meaning. And when I looked at the chart of the 7 types of meaning of language, or um it 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 rang true. In other words, I'm looking at it thinking, well, yeah, this makes perfect sense as I see it written out, but I am 100% sure people are not walking around realizing that there are
Right.
different kinds of meaning. And
Right.
I was wondering if possibly you could explain, not necessarily like list them, but maybe explain some of the types of meaning so people can begin to recognize that there are different types in the first place.
Right. So this really comes down to a breakdown of semantics. And I have to really emphasize that semantics is such an important part of language. It's where all the meaning is encoded and where all the meaning is decoded. So whenever I'm talking to someone, I'm encoding a message. That message goes to you and you pick it apart and your brain decodes it and you understand what I'm saying. So this is how semantics works. Now there's two ways that works. There's the cognitive method. So you hear the message and you actually actively think about what I'm saying.
Right.
Or there's the passive, where I'm taking it in without really thinking about it, but I'm still decoding it and I'm still understanding it. So the process is a little bit different. Does that make
And
sense?
yes. And what when propaganda does propaganda capitalize on any specific type of meaning, or did it, or use of semantics, or is it all, does it use all the different kinds, and it's put together in a different way?
Well,
Like, where do they start?
it uses both. Um, it tries to convince people who are actively thinking that this is the correct method, but a lot of people, they're not active thinkers, especially these days. Who these days sits down and really thinks about something? They switch on the television. They're not thinking deeply about the contents that is coming to them. They're just absorbing it. So this is how it works in a passive way. So it can be active or it can be passive. Both sides are used in order to indoctrinate the public. The passive is quite a lot more frightening because you don't really realize it's happening. and you begin to build a belief system without really realizing why you're building a belief system. So actually, in the book, I went over those 7 types of meaning are actually the types that were described by Jeffrey Leach.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the connotative meaning. So what is communicated by referring to something. The stylistic meaning is the communication in the social circumstances. So in a formal setting or in an informal setting or between friends. The affective meaning, what feelings or attitudes I'm communicating to you. So the emotions involved in that. So a lot of propaganda uses that. We're all going to die. Or, oh, it's not really that important. It's not such a large issue. There's some kind of emotion that's encoded into that message.
Right.
Then we have the reflected meaning, which is associated with another sense, but using the same expression. So a kind of a double barrel meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So a meaning hidden within another meaning. And then we have the collocative meaning, which is association with words that tend to occur in the environment of another word. So, for example, a happy family, these things that link together, concepts that link together. And then we have
social justice.
Right, yes. So words that naturally pair together. And then we have the thematic meaning, which is communicated in the way that a message is organized in terms of the order or the emphasis of the message. Right. So in one sentence, the way that one word is emphasized may change the meaning that we're giving, or the emotion is often linked to this as well. So you may have thematic, and then you have also the affective joined together in one message. So, for example, if I say, "Oh, I like your dress," or "Oh, I like your dress,"
wow,
the meaning is I'm saying exactly the same words.
right.
I haven't changed anything. I've only emphasized some things. I've only put emotion in there. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I was listening to a politician do a commercial last night from my county and here, and speaking about our our federal Department of Education. And I found it fascinating that many of the commenters were just glowing with praise for this person, and you should run for president, and oh my gosh, and you're the most amazing person. And I listened twice. And the first, I realized this person is speaking facts in terms of what on paper, what he's talking about on paper. This department does this, or it's supposed to do this, and it's supposed to do that, and it's tasked with this and tasked with that, and everything was just, I'm going to read you a list of the jobs that are allegedly done by this department, right? But it was his manner, folks, like just friendly, and I just care, and he used the word help and care over and over again, attached. This is how we help. This is how we show we care. All packaged in with the list, like the job description.
Right.
But it was the framing and the tone, and as you point out, like the sort of the syntax, the arrangement of the words that I think conveyed this emotion of, don't, we can't get rid of this. It would be so bad. It's like taking oxygen from us. And I did what you suggest. I was actively thinking about it, and I said, this person used a lot of words and a lot of emotions to read a job description of a department. Right. And so it defended the department, the continued existence of the department, without talking at all about the effectiveness of the department, about any potential corruption with the department. I mean, it was fascinating. And as I did this, I was sort of thinking about our discussion this morning coming up, and I said, I have to mention this to him because this seems like a perfect example of someone who knew exactly what they were doing when they wrote and directed this commercial. They knew
Right.
exactly what they were doing. No, this could not possibly happen by accident.
Right. So a lot of people that are in those public speaking, whether it's in politics or advertisement or whatever it is, they actually have coaches that teach them how to accentuate this word or pause here, have this facial expression. Because, humans, we communicate with meta language. If I'm sitting here stone faced, even if I'm saying something nice, you're probably not going to believe me. Whereas I can be saying the most terrible thing with a smile on my face and it all sounds lovely,
Yes.
because we use meta language as well to put everything together and get a complete message that way. So body language, facial expression, these things are really important. And this idea of being nice, or this idea of caring, it's a common theme that we see, well, throughout history, especially since we've had media that records video and audio together, which has been very short time in human history. Written language doesn't quite convey things the same way.
Mm-mm.
You have to be able to write very well to convey the same meaning. And then even then it's kind of lost in translation sometimes. So if you have a look at some of the most terrible people in history, they were really good public speakers. If you have a look at Hitler, if you have a look at Mussolini, uh, they were very carried away and they got the crowds worked up into a fervor, even though what they were saying was completely immoral, disgusting things.
Right.
People went hook, line, and sinker because they thought, this person really cares about us. He's really worried about us. He really wants us to do well. So this is kind of a theme that you see a lot. Be kind, care. I care about you. I'm doing this for the greater good. Yes.
Right. Exactly. And you mentioned that there are people who know exactly what they're doing. Are there places people go to study? I mean, how do they do that? Like study how to manipulate people?
It's called university.
It's got university. Okay. Um, do you think those public speakers from history were innately gifted at this technique, or did they too study it? I mean,
Uh, well,
can one
if
be
we,
innately gifted at this? I guess is my question.
yes, there are people with kind of the social skills, or sociopaths. Sociopaths tend to be very good at language use because they use it to manipulate other people. Psychopaths as well, but true psychopaths are actually a very tiny percent of the population. So
Mhm.
being a psychopath is something that is a mental problem. Basically, you're born that way. But being a sociopath, which is actually far more common, is a learned set of traits. So people growing up, they learn how to manipulate their parents, or they learn how to manipulate their brother or sister, and then their teacher or their friends, these kinds of things. So um, that can be how it starts. Some people
Mhm.
are naturally gifted at that, or they
Wow.
pick up on it much faster than other people. Yeah, and they tend to be a bit more extroverted. So if we if we have a look, for example, at Goebbels, he was not originally a very good public speaker, but as he got more worked up into the ideology by himself, he actually got more naturally worked up by what he was saying, because he was drinking his own Kool-Aid, basically. So as a
That's
result, he became more convincing to the people around him by being convinced himself that this was, I guess, in his mind, the right thing to do.
that's fascinating. So it's self-perpetuating in a way, or
Right.
you can, even if you start off being a person who is drawn in, passively, you can become an active propagandist, as you said, because you've drunk the Kool-Aid.
Right.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to people like that and language, once they've done that, once they've drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak, how can language be reverse engineered to wake them up, or no? Is it done?
Well, it really depends on where they sit on that spectrum of being indoctrinated. If they're one of the people doing indoctrination, it's likely that they have some kind of skin in the game, let's say. So they have something to get out of it, whether it's power or money or whatever kind of social status is attached to that. So in that case, it's very hard to convince someone that something is true. Whereas there's the fence sitters, they're going along with the ideology because they think, oh, this is the right thing to do, or it's kind, or, it's not such a big deal. Those are the people that can be convinced that, well, potentially convinced that there's something wrong going on. But to do that, you have to get people to think. And there's no way you can force someone to think. You can just give them the tools to say, all right, I can understand why you think that way, but have you ever asked yourself why they're saying that? Or do you think there's something they're getting out of saying that? How would it be if it was done this way?
Right.
You have to ask a question rather than say, this is what it is like. Because if you just tell them this is what it is like, usually people have some kind of resistance. The aim is to get them to think about what is going on. So, for example,
really good point.
We need to simplify schools' curriculum in areas where there's minority groups to make it easier for them. Okay, so in that case, you can ask, okay, that seems like a nice idea because you want to help people. Helping people is a good idea. Let's face it. Everybody who's normal wants to help other people. But you could also ask, do you think that lowering the quality of education is going to help those people in the long term when they have to go out into wider society and then compete with people who have had a better basic education? Or you can ask, has lowering the standards of education ever helped people to achieve more? So getting them to think about what is actually going on, that is a very important process to go through. Just telling them is not going to convince them. They need to have their idea challenged by a question. They have to think about it. They have to tear apart the propaganda in their own head. And if we look at cases like in the USSR or in Nazi Germany, the people that were very resistant to that, they were people that kept questioning why things are being done. Are the Jews really bad? I haven't really seen any of these things that the Jews have been accused of. I had Jewish neighbors for 30 years. Okay, are they really that way? They helped me when I was sick. They didn't take all my money. Something doesn't match up here. Those are the people that really resisted until the end.
Right.
Yeah. Because they were able to question.
What I'm curious about, though, is there are changes happening in the language that have completely changed the priorities in the first place. So you just mentioned schools and you mentioned academic quality. I have asked those questions, and I have people challenging me saying, who says we're reducing the quality? Who says we're lowering the standards? And they deny that the changes they call for equate to that, despite the evidence, like the empirical evidence that it is so. I mean, you point out, if you are going to say we don't need to teach children that math, that getting the right answer in math is important, that's not the priority in math. The priority is creativity, et cetera, I'm reading. Then you get people to believe that propaganda, that lie. Then the next question, do you think it will benefit this population to reduce academic quality? They're already in denial. They're already saying that's an inaccurate assessment of what we're doing. So now you have to go back to their false claim that the most important thing is creativity and demand to know why. But they've now linked the word creativity. They've linked the word inquiry. They've linked all of their words to concepts like help and care and progress and equity and things like that. So it feels like people are even redefining the meanings of whole entire concepts, not just individual words.
Right. So redefinition is something you see pretty much with every extreme ideology that's ever left any records to have a look at something. So, for example, the North Korean state, they changed words so that it means something else. So when people read South Korean, they actually can't understand it because the meanings have been so dramatically changed. That, for example, there's a formal word like aboji. It means father. But in North Korea, it refers to the beloved leader of the state. So when people read something from South Korea, whether they want to or not, they connect that image of a father with this stately figure. So redefinition of language, it can be extreme cases like that, or it can be slowly incremental changes in the language. And what you see also is a moving of the goalposts. So just to check that you're in line with the ideology, today the meaning is here, and then tomorrow the meaning is here, and tomorrow the meaning is here. And it's a bit like, have you ever gone fishing?
Yes.
On a boat?
Yes.
Okay.
Deep sea fishing, in fact.
Okay. Deep sea fishing, have you been able to see the shoreline? Or have you been out so far that okay.
Both. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, both. All right. So let's imagine you're on a boat and you can see the shoreline.
Got it.
If you're out very far in the ocean and you're watching the shoreline, is it easy to know how far you've drifted away from the shore if you're a very long distance away?
No.
No. If you're close to the shore, is it easy to notice?
Easier, certainly.
Easier to notice.
Yeah.
But unless you're awake and your boat is not anchored, you can have drifted very far off the course from where you've been. This is how it works with language. If you're not awake, because language is fluid, you will eventually just take on whatever new meaning there is. Now, language naturally changes like that. We naturally take a meaning and it evolves over time into a new meaning. But this is different because this is now an artificial process, like changing pronouns or changing what gender means. I mean, gender was a synonym of sex for forever until 1955, when Kinsey decided we need to change something because my work doesn't make sense if I say it like this. Let's make this a different meaning. And from there, it goes like that.
And now we're having children find themselves on the Kinsey scale.
Right, which is very, very disturbing. Yes. This is a Western problem. Most of the rest of the world is just looking at this and laughing because it's so preposterous.
Right. And
if you showed this to most people in Asia, they would laugh and say, what kind of sick comedy is this?
Yeah, there are plenty of people right here doing the same, but because of the twisting of language, many are intimidated out of saying anything about it
Right.
and using the language correctly. So it seems to me that one of the ways that language gets engineered is through the use of intimidation as well. So how
Definitely.
the language changes are packaged in something, encoded with some kind of emotion to make people who are active thinkers feel like you can't use the language any differently than we have just directed you to use it, or bad things will happen to you. So it
Right.
isn't just everyone just goes along and drifts away on the boat. There is a sense that I have to adopt this language use. I have to use pronouns. I have to stop saying woman if I'm a doctor. Sometimes they're explicitly saying you may not. This means you are tolerant. This equals goodness or virtue if you use the word this way, or if you abandon this word completely from your vocabulary, you're now a good person.
Right. So this is a very common theme. I keep saying common theme because these are just a repetition of history throughout, using the same kind of models, using the same kind of approaches. I keep coming back to Nazi Germany because it's really the time that this was done on a uh, very focused and very wide scale. I mean, they had propaganda going in schools, newspapers, churches, everywhere. It was just full propaganda wherever you turn. And
Mhm.
one of the things was, they want people to believe it. And how do you get people to believe it? You make sure that it's everywhere. You can't escape it because it's in your vision all the time. The second point is, even if you don't believe it, you keep your mouth shut about it because uh, there are social consequences, either social consequences or physical consequences for saying the wrong thing. So um, once the propaganda spreads more, you see more of that kind of violence happening because now questioning the ideology becomes an immoral action. It can be questioning it to try and understand it, but you don't need to understand it. You just need to follow it. This is how it works, especially in these kind of very aggressive ideologies.
You
Because the thing is that if you actually think about it, it is preposterous, most of the things that are being told. I mean, it was preposterous that Jews were the problem of everything that was happening in Germany. Anybody that thought about it for 2 minutes could know. But you weren't allowed to question that narrative, because questioning the narrative will make you think, and making you think is damaging to the narrative because it is preposterous. So this is why we see that people that um, want these kinds of propaganda to spread, they always want to stop any kind of inquiry into why this is.
right.
Because asking the question can damage something if it is not true.
Mhm.
If something is true, you can ask as many questions as you want. It's
Right.
going to hold up to scrutiny.
Mhm.
It's not a problem. That
Mhm.
is why in propaganda, the other side of the story is not so important.
Mm.
You shouldn't ask
Right.
it.
Or
Right.
just deemed evil. Like we don't
Right.
need to learn that because it's
So
bad.
I made a comment that puberty blockers cause a lot of damage to growing human bodies. And the retort to that was, uh, those medications are used for precocious puberty. So girls going into puberty too early. Okay, they are used for that. Uh, they also damage their bodies terribly. There are many, many lawsuits going on at the moment for women that have used these puberty blockers for precocious puberty, not even anything else. And they have bone problems. They have a list of medical problems that you would need many sheets of paper to cover.
Right.
And they're financially destroyed because, I mean, healthcare is expensive in America.
Right.
So that was one of the things, because people have said, well, there's precocious puberty. I made a point. It's not really a point, because you didn't ask the further question. All right, what's that going? And
Yeah.
I will tell people that puberty blockers are also used to castrate violent criminals.
Yes.
Some of the worst criminals, yes.
Right.
So anything that powerful, and I got told that it's the same as using paracetamol. As far as I know, paracetamol has not castrated anyone.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the most you're going to do is get rid of your headache.
Right.
So, you mentioned specifically in the book the term democratic. And in politics, you talk about how it's easier for, language to drift and, from its original meaning when you're in the political realm. And we live in a world now where everything has been politicized. So it's easier to list the things that are not political than the things that are. And covering education as I do, it's just one of the semantic tricks that's been played that I notice is making any question about pedagogy or praxis or any of it political. You question it, therefore you are this political persuasion, or you're against democracy. Or so they've done both. They've twisted words to have them mean something that you are for, or against something that you're not even discussing at the time. And they take the word democratic and throw it around like it's some kind of protective wrap around
Right.
anything they're saying and doing. Can you explain to the audience how that works? Like, why do they choose that word? And then why does that work for them so well?
Well, I mean, democratic, whenever you think of democratic, what do you think of?
I think of a mob. I think of a lamb and two wolves voting on
Okay.
what's for dinner. But that's me.
Generally, the idea of a kind of democracy is that everybody decides together. So we're
Oh,
all in it together.
sure.
We're all deciding what's going to happen, and we reach a common consensus. That's probably why they're using that word. It's the same as using equity, because it gives the idea that we're all going up together. We're all holding hands and striving together to get to a point. So if you question any of those, you're not really just questioning doing that particular thing. You're questioning and bringing into conflict the whole unity of that group. So basically, you're making yourself the black sheep, because you've gone against the group who have decided to do this nice thing. And it's a ploy that's often used. I mean, if you look on the scale, the democracy scale, all the countries with democracy in their name have the worst human rights records and are the least democratic. So it's just a label that's easy to put on and gives people that nice, fuzzy, warm feeling inside, kind of like radiation.
Kind of like radiation. No, it's true. I have a visceral reaction to the word in the opposite direction from the one they would like me to have. The more I hear it, the more afraid I get, for the reason you just cited. Because there have been, Democratic Socialist Republic of blah blah blah, right? Or the
Right.
you know, Hitler was elected democratically, and so were many other dictators. What people went and cast their votes, and majorities are not right because they're majorities. This is something I was taught when I was a child, and was taught the United States was not a democracy, it was a republic. We use democratic means of processing elections, but they're for the purpose of electing representatives. We do not literally direct elect based on majority rule. And we're not even teaching that anymore at all when we teach civics. And so some people will argue with me and say, well, yes, we are. And I said, that's interesting because I'm meeting children in high school and even college who have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. So if it's being taught, it's not being taught well.
But I find America to be quite interesting because you have the lowest literacy rates in all of the Anglosphere.
Yes.
I mean, even your English level is quite low.
Yes.
And I mean, I think personally, from a linguistic aspect, I like dialects. I think people should speak their local dialect. I think the dying out of dialects due to media is a terrible thing. So I think if people speak, for example, Ebonics at home, it's not a problem. If they speak it outside, it's not a problem. But they also need to have a high enough level education that they can speak or use the other forms of the standard language as well. I mean, when I usually don't speak English to my family anyway, but I mean, when I'm speaking with friends from Australia, you probably wouldn't understand what we're saying because we just go straight into Strine, which is the countryside dialect, and make a lot of jokes in that. Sorry, an airplane is going over my head. I have jets flying over. Yes.
I used to live next door to an elevated train, so I
Okay.
understand the problem a long time ago.
Um, so where was I? Yes. So I think it's good for people to speak their dialects. I don't think that is a sign of low IQ or anything like that, which was a common belief a long time ago. Um, but I think they should also be able to use their language well as
Right.
a standard form. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, I would think having the dialect fluency would serve almost as a hedge against people trying to manipulate you because you'd be able to sort of gut check with those people using your own language or your own dialect and also be able to communicate with each other outside the propaganda bubble a bit. But I don't know. Maybe it doesn't work that way. I never
Well,
had a problem with dialogue.
that's probably one reason that the media would like to get rid of dialects. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
been a lot of contention about this. It used to be in the UK that you could only speak the Queen's English and be on the BBC, but they did away with that. So probably because people were getting really upset about it, and it does stop that to a degree. But the problem is when media becomes so saturated, eventually kids start to lose the ability to use the dialects. Most kids in Korea now, they don't speak the dialects uh, outside of Seoul. Really, there's been a big decrease in the way that the language is used.
Right. So when it comes to a young mind and the development of language, something that concerns me greatly. You just mentioned the illiteracy problem. I'm also concerned about spoken language, spoken English, because when children go to school, they're learning all of it. They're learning how to, read, write, and even spoken vocabulary. Um, I'm very concerned because we've seen how this propagandizing and language engineering works on adults. It seems to work remarkably well on the most educated adults. I'm hoping you can help me understand that in a moment. But what about the young mind that doesn't have a full vocabulary? So for the first time, they're only learning the meanings of the words the propagandist wants them to learn. I mean,
It's
does
it's
that
very it's very difficult to undo that damage. I'll say that from the outset. It's very difficult to undo that once they're set in that. And that's why propaganda in every ideological group, they target children. I mean, Nazi Germany, USSR, ISIS. Who do they go for? They go for kids, because children are open. They don't really know right from wrong, and they're a blank slate. So as long as they trust the person that's giving the information, they're going to swallow hook, line, and sinker.
Right.
And then getting them out of that is very difficult once they're confused, because they then create a belief system in themselves. So who was it? I'm trying to think of their names now. Two scientists, they had a look at people who had survived the war in Germany as adults, and who had lived from Weimar Republic, and then the children who had gone to school in the Third Reich, and then they compared how their ideologies were comparable. So later, the children that had gone to school in the Third Reich, they knew anti-Semitism was wrong. Morally, they knew it was wrong, but they were more likely to hate Jews.
Seems contradictory.
Right. So even though they knew it to be wrong, they still had a stronger anti-Semitic notion than the people who had gone to school in the Weimar Republic, which was anti-Semitic probably, but it wasn't the thing to be.
That's fascinating.
Right. So it took another generation after that were born after for that to then go down, because obviously schools weren't saying Jews are blah, 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 blah anymore. They were
Right.
teaching the opposite. Yeah.
Right.
We should
So
respect
then,
everyone.
when a school teaches children today that they are living in a white supremacist nation, that racism is the normal, pervasive state of existence, that only white people can be racist, that, I mean, I could go on. We know what they're teaching.
Right, right.
That will hit the ears of a young person, a child, and even if it creates some cognitive dissonance, in other words, they go out into the world, or maybe they have, like, they're biracial themselves, okay, and they have relatives that are both white and black, and so it creates a kind of confusion that this isn't what I'm personally experiencing or seeing. They will still believe the words they're being taught every single day in the school, more so than their own eyes. Is that correct? Or
Yes,
more like,
and then, well, they might start to then look at situations from a racialized point of view. So something that may not be racist at all. For example, parents of different races. And I don't like the term race, because it's a nothing term.
I
How you
agree. I
define
hate it.
Let's use ethnic group. I prefer to use ethnic group, because at least that's accurate. You can belong to an ethnic group, but
Okay.
I mean, a race is,
We're all humans.
yeah, I mean, Europeans are technically the same race, but then when you break it down to ethnic makeup, it kind of falls apart. Yeah. Anyway, back to the point I was making. Parents have disagreements. That's kind of normal. Married couples have disagreements. A child that hasn't been subject to a lot of propaganda like that is, oh, mom and dad are fighting again. All right. But when they get taught, okay, this is the system, dad's being racist because blah, 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 it might not have anything to do with anything like that. It might be about someone did spend too much money shopping, woman, and
Oh.
actually throw that in
No,
there.
no. I know plenty of men who are on Amazon, like, add to cart, add to cart, add to cart.
I'm guilty too. But yeah, then they start to get a racialized view of everything, which I think is terrible. Yeah. It's terrible in two ways. if that kid is white and they're being told that whites are this and that, one of two things is probably going to happen. They're going to go, oh, I'm a terrible person because of how I was born. Or if they're in a not very good environment, they're going to go, oh yeah, I'm the superior one in this situation, and that's how it's always been. So you get this polarization either way, which is not very healthy. The same thing is for a black child. It's just as much child abuse to a black child, because they're thinking, yes, because of my classmate and because of society, I'm never going to be anything because the system is against me. Or the other opposite can happen. I have to fight for whatever because I'm not letting them keep me down. So that is not an environment where you're bringing people together.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you don't teach history. You very much should teach history. All the terrible things that happen, kids should know that, but they should be old enough to actually take it in.
Right.
I'm seeing a lot of American everything basically in curriculum is aimed at children that really are not able to comprehend what they're learning.
No.
So if they're not actually able to intellectually take it in, that's indoctrination, not education.
Right.
Right.
Yep. And I've been
So,
trying to explain that to people from a cognitive standpoint. The brain simply isn't developed at the age they're giving them concepts way ahead of their brain development, and they're speaking about those things in a way that is engineering them to form a belief system, as you've pointed out. I think you refer to something called sociolinguistic engineering, where the semantics are the what is it, the effect, what is the one that you called it, the associative meaning
right,
of the semantics is sort of dominant, I guess.
right,
Is that a correct
right,
understanding?
right, right, right.
Okay. Can you explain to us, I mean, you've sort of explained how this works, technically and so forth. Um, what can happen? Like, what have people, I don't think, appreciate how fast it works. We talked about the drifting, okay, but how well it works, how well sociolinguistic engineering works across lots of people, and how quickly. Before we started recording, you mentioned an example of how people were transformed to do things they would not otherwise have done. Can you explain that for people?
Right. So if people feel threatened, or if they feel that it is going to protect them through the actions, people have an ability to change, to become very psychotic very quickly. We have the example of when the Nazis took over Poland, and they were Germanizing areas. So there were people that they deemed were possible to assimilate. So these were people that they deemed Aryan enough to become part of Germany. So they were like Polish Germans and these kinds of people. So when they went into the Polish German areas, they hit them with all this propaganda, and they made it very clear what would happen to them if they did not comply. And the result was, in a very short time, those people changed 180 degrees. And they butchered all the Jews in their area. And I'm talking in the most terrible ways: pitchforks, scythes. It was not what a normal person would do. But these were normal people. And they felt threatened because they knew what would happen to them, or they believed the propaganda and they felt good about the spoils that they were going to get. So it's a carrot and stick situation. Some people were bought over by one, some people were bought over by the other. but they very quickly changed when there was social pressure on them. And
Right.
people that didn't want to do it, well, they just got caught along in the fervor, in the fury of what was going on. So people
I
always
felt
say,
like,
never say never.
yeah.
There's a reason you never say never, because these things happen.
Mhm. Right. As I mentioned to you, I was seeing things just during the pandemic with the policies that shocked me. And I saw both things in play. People who were terrified, absolutely terrified by, the constant sort of death ticker they were seeing. I think if you did one for people driving cars, no one would get in a car. But um, they had fear saying, get away from me. And they were willing to, torture and abuse people or have the law do it for them because of fear. And then you had the other side of, I'm a good person and I care about people and you don't, and I'm better than you. And you could see it in the same setting, in the same, on an airplane, for example. You'd see both
Right.
examples happening right in front of your face, and it happens so quickly. And I've mentioned that to people. I said, don't you see where this could go? And it's, people have a really hard time taking that and extrapolating to the pitchforks and the sides. And they'll say, well, they would never go that far. And this isn't that bad. Or it's just a little bit of prison time. It's like, it's just a fine. It's just being locked in your house. It's just a quarantine. And when you say, okay, a month ago or 6 months ago, you were a person who would have said, how dare they deprive me of my civil liberties and tell me that I have to stay locked in my house? How dare a giant corporation have so much play with the government to make me put something in my body, right? But then after the language use of however many months that took, and it didn't take long, it was frighteningly fast. The same people who were civil libertarians a few months before were authoritarians of the, first order. And I perceive it was just language that did it. Because even things like, you will, you'll lose your job, that seemed to come after the first wave, which really got the majority of people to just go along. I felt like the threats and the coercion, the overt coercion, was for the thinking people. That was for
Right.
the people who resisted. But the majority of people were won over simply by words. Did you get that same impression?
Yes, yes. I mean, that's generally what happens fairly in a common kind of phenomenon. Yes. Most people get won over by the words in the first, and
Okay.
then the thinkers need a little bit more uh, coaxing to
Coaxing.
form in line. Yeah.
Right. Now I know we're coming up on a time we need to stop because of both the time difference and broadband and so forth. So I would just want to ask one final question about that. I'm sure the audience is wondering, what can we do? I mean, is there anything we as individuals can do to resist this in our own lives, to protect our children from it? What do you suggest?
Uh, Not really, but uh, I mean, there's not much you can do on a large social scale.
Right.
And if you can go out and you can fight with the system and that, but it only actually causes more problems. Trying to have a conversation with people is the best methodology. uh, if you have school age children, certainly you should know what they are learning at school. Have an interest in your children. The TV is not a babysitter, especially now, all the things that are coming out on TV. These are very harmful for children. Um, know what your children are studying, spend time with your children so that they're, you know, kind of parental friendship has been on a decrease for many years. If kids love their parents and are able to communicate well with their parents, they're going to be more able to tell you if they're having a problem at school. not just a curriculum problem, maybe they have another problem as well. So having good communication with children is really important, and that's regardless of uh, whatever ethnic group you belong to.
Okay.
Studies
Okay.
have been done. People, regardless of the ethnic group, that communicate well with their kids, they have better outcomes for their children. And we've seen this, that I don't know what term to use, because everything is apparently wrong these days. A lot of my American friends just want to be called black, and then others are saying African American. So you can choose whichever one you are comfortable with. Um, but the group that do the best, they have parents that are interested in that,
Yeah.
and it comes down to that. So
Right.
have an interest in your children, and then you'll know what's going on.
Right.
If your children trust you in that way, and you can have a conversation about this, oh, mommy, I don't know if I'm a boy or a girl today. That's a very good time for you to be saying, of course you're a girl. You were born that way, like this. So then you have something that you can push against the propaganda that
Right.
they're getting from school. So have an interest in children, I'd say, is the first step. Also, learn to ask questions yourself. Every news channel has a bias. They're not there to tell you the news. They're there to tell you what to think. So you have to ask yourself, okay, why do I like this channel? Is it telling me what I want to hear? Am I really interested in it because it's correct, or am I interested in it because it's telling me what I want to hear?
Right.
Is there another side to the story?
Right.
Right? This is how propaganda works. You think that, oh, I'm right, and that's how they get you, because you're already drifting from that shoreline into this direction, because you weren't watching. So I'd say another good way to avoid propaganda is to switch off your TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I find it ironic that the people who hold the ideology that says check your biases, check your privilege, check your, like always be looking internally for all your biases, wants you to not do that when
Right.
it comes to theirs. So I find that one of their techniques in their use of language is projection.
Right.
So
Right.
they're telling you the truth while lying to you is one of the
Exactly.
things that fascinates me the most, and I see it like a giant beam. And I know not everybody does, but when I see people doing that, they might as well be waving red flags at me to go the other way, because that that's something. I don't know if it's used to intentionally confuse people, and then they fill in that confusion with, oh, you're confused, this is why, or if it just works. This is who I am, but it's that guy. It's so strange to me. Um, so have conversations, make sure you're actively thinking about messages that are being communicated to you. Recognize that semantics matters. It's everything. It really does matter how
Right.
the words are put together,
Right.
how they're presented, how they're framed. So if somebody tries to shut you down and say, well, that's just semantics, don't go fall for that,
Right.
because that's what makes the difference between I really like your dress and I really like your dress, or
Right.
whatever, nice dress. Anyway, so this
Always
has
ask
been
why.
always ask
Always
why,
ask
right?
why.
That's a great point. So
Why do they want me to think this way? Is this true? Why do they want my children to think this?
right. And who benefits?
Right.
Who
Why, who,
benefits?
what, when, where, how? These are very basic
Wow.
questions.
Empirical methods.
Yes, you're not allowed to do that anymore.
It would seem not. It would
Right.
seem not. And you do, I mean, I know we're out of time, but I want to encourage people to pick up a copy of this book, because you also talk about the pseudo morality which I know James Lindsay has talked about, pseudomorality and virtuous victimhood ideology and other things. There's a lot of meat here that we didn't have time to cover. Maybe you'll come back and talk to me some more in
Definitely.
another broadcast when we can have more broadband or more time. But it's really excellent, and you should take a look. The Babylon Cipher, and this is
Thanks.
by Alaric Naudé.
No idea. Yes. Yes.
I'm gonna get Naudé. There's no A. I have a mental block. It's
I have a
because of
terrible
the
name.
propaganda. It's because of the propaganda.
I blame
Anyway.
my parents. Yeah.
Okay. Naudé. Naudé.
Yes.
Okay. There we go.
Yes.
So
It's available on Amazon, but if you don't like Amazon, then I think it's on other bookstores too.
right, why everything is language and language is everything. And is there any place people can follow your work? Do you do any writing ongoing that they should know about? They could read
Uh,
essays or anything like that?
I have a website, naude.eu, where all my work is up there. So that
Great.
should be, yeah.
Yes, because you've written also recently on some of these topics in depth and drawn some fire from it, but we'll have to get into that maybe in a future
Right.
broadcast. But this, I think, was a fantastic primer for people to better understand how language engineering works, well, what it is, how it works, and why it's dangerous, especially for children, which is what I concern myself here, at the Reason We Learn with. But it's also really important for us as adults because we can be vulnerable too. So
Right.
I thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we can do this again.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks.